So you're a Catholic convert. How do you raise your kids Catholic in a faith that you are sometimes brand new in? How do you keep your kids Catholic in a faith that you are brand new in? What happens when you join a parish that seems really sleepy and boring and there's nothing there for your family? It's tough as a Catholic convert. I get these kinds of questions all the time. So I'm grateful for our guest this week, Father Sebastian Walshe, to join us to unpack these and many other ideas. This is a Catholic convert's guide to raising and keeping your kids Catholic. Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Thank you for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us again this week. We're in for a fantastic conversation. I am joined by Father Sebastian Walshe. He's a Norbertine Canon of the Abbey of St. Michael in the Diocese of Orange, California, where he's a professor of philosophy for the seminary program and dean of studies. After finishing his studies at Thomas Aquinas College in California, he continued studies at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C., receiving a license in philosophy, attended the Angelicum, the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome, where he got a master's in sacred theology and a doctorate in philosophy. He is a Catholic convert, and for our purposes here, the author of a fantastic new book, Always a Catholic, How to Keep Your Kids in the Faith for Life and Bring Them Back If They Have Strayed from Catholic Answers Press. Not strayed from Catholic Answers Press. The book is from Catholic Answers Press. No one strays from Catholic Answers Press. Father, thank you for being here. Welcome to the show, and hello.
Thank you. Hi, Keith. It's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to begin because I'd be remiss not to ask you questions like about your own faith journey, because this show is a show. I mean, I'm a convert. Lots of our viewers, listeners are converts thinking of converting, looking into the Catholic faith. And I understand that you have a conversion story, if I'm not mistaken.
No, you're right.
I would love to know a bit about how you, I mean, we see you here. You're a priest now, a Catholic priest. What happened?
So, okay, I can give you the short version of the long version if you want. So when I was a kid, I was actually raised Jewish. My mom was Jewish. My dad was a non-practicing Catholic when they married. So my brother and I were raised Jewish. We went to temple. We learned all the prayers. We did all that stuff. Then when I was about 7 years old, my mom had a rather remarkable experience. She had to go through a very serious surgery, very serious operation, and she was on the operating table for hours. And during that time, her heart stopped for about 4 minutes, and she had one of those near-death experiences. Yeah. And during that experience, she said she experienced the presence of God. And she said it was like, she had to say what God was. She says, God is love. It's just pure love. And somehow, some way, she got a hold of the scriptures and the New Testament. And there, of course, you read, God is love. And so she met this Lutheran minister who prayed with her. And so she decided she wanted to be baptized. So she was baptized and became a Lutheran. So my brother and I were, baptized Lutheran when I was about 7. I think I was actually 8, just turned 8 at that point. And unbeknownst to me, by the way, I found out years later, my dad, though he was not a practicing Catholic, he thought to himself, well, they should be baptized. So I found out I was furtively baptized by my dad in the kitchen sink, the Catholic, oh, wow. Yeah. But anyway, some priest I am. I'm like baptized in a sink somewhere. So, years later, my mom passed away when I was young. Those health problems that she had continued, and so my dad's mother helped to raise us, my grandmother, and she was a practicing Catholic. So she started bringing us to the Catholic Church, and I got to know these Catholic people in a kind of a youth group for teenagers. And they challenged a lot of my assumptions. I'd never met a practicing Catholic in my whole life, that was young, who really had a personal relationship with Christ. And so they challenged a lot of my assumptions. And then in the meantime, there was this book in my grandmother's house in the library, this old dusty volume from like 1895 or something. And it was called the Compendium of Catholic Knowledge. It looked very impressive. And it looked like there would be spells in it or something, So I pulled it down from the shelf and was kind of reading it, And in there, it had all these different apologetic arguments, including about the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist.
Yeah.
And it was going through all that. And I was 13 or 12 or 13 at the time. And I thought to myself, these are good arguments. This is what the scripture really says. Jesus actually did say, this is my body, this is my blood, and all the evidence from John chapter 6. So I was firmly convinced that Jesus was truly present in the Eucharist. Now, a little bit of a backstory to that too. As a Lutheran, when I was a little boy, I wanted to receive communion early. Apparently, they wouldn't let you receive communion until like 9 or something, and I was just turned 8 or something, and I wanted to receive communion early. So I was very interested in receiving communion in the Lutheran Church. And one day after communion, the way the Lutherans would do it is the pastor would go around with this big thing, a loaf of shepherd's bread, and give everyone a pinch. And then you'd go down, and then the Lutherans don't drink out of the same chalice. They always have these little tiny shot glasses. Yeah. So they'd pass out a little shot glass, and then they'd put that into, we knelt for communion. They didn't even believe anyway, we knelt for communion, and in the altar rail, there were these little holes to put the shot glasses in. So a little old lady would come by and collect all the shot glasses, and I noticed that there was some wine left at the bottom of several of the glasses. And I said to her, "What do you do with that?" And she says, I poured in the bushes. And I said, "You can't do that. That's the blood of Jesus." And no one had ever taught me that, because of course they weren't teaching that in Lutheran school, and my dad was not practicing. I didn't get it from him. So somehow I had this idea that it was supposed to be the blood of Jesus, even when I was a little kid. So when I actually read the Catholic teaching, it just immediately resonated with me about the truth of the real presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. And I thought to myself, well, if the Catholic Church is right about this, and this is so important, then I can trust it on the other things. And so I decided right then and there I wanted to be a Catholic. So when I was 13 years old, I decided to be confirmed, and I was able to. I met with a priest for like 6 times or something like that. It was very easy in those days, and I was confirmed in the next class and never looked back. It was wonderful. And years later, of course, I became a priest in an order which is dedicated to the Eucharist. The Norbertine Order. St. Norbert's always depicted in iconography holding up the Blessed Sacrament. And then it turns out the year I was ordained a priest was the year of the Holy Eucharist. So all of that's always been a theme in my whole life, is the Eucharist. I think Jesus, sort of as a reward for my faith in the Eucharist, I think he not only gave me a priestly vocation, but also many special graces associated with my faith in the Eucharist. So that's my story. I'm sticking to it.
Oh, I'm always glad that I asked, and I'm glad I asked you. That's a fantastic story. What an incredible... I love that this dusty old book from the 1920s or whatever off the shelf was what brought that apologetic argument to the fore for you. That's amazing that, that, gosh, you would think is outdated and antiquated, but here it is, relevant to you and really changed your life. I remember I resonate in the fact that before I became Catholic, we were at this non-denominational church that met inside of a Lutheran church. We'd have an earlier service before they came in, did their whole thing. And we did a church tour when we first moved in there, and I was part of kind of the leadership team. So we got a little church tour behind the scenes, and they had this sink in the rectory where the priest would not the rectory. What do they call it?
The sacristy.
Sacristy, yeah. They had a kind of a similar version of that we have in a Catholic church today, and it has a little sink there. There's a special sink, and they said, "Oh, this is a sink that's only used for communion, because the pipe in the sink goes right into the ground and not into the sewer system." And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. Like, why is that? And the answer was kind of, well, it's just we want to make sure we're really reverent with the elements of the communion, but there wasn't really any purpose behind more than that, right? And I can see now, I understand now. There is a bit of that idea that Jesus is present in there. Certainly, in many Lutheran churches, they believe that in some sense he is present. And here was a bit of a whiff of that. But
sure.
kind of had me asking questions like, well, why do you even need a separate sink for that kind of thing? Like, what
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah. So I want to dig in here. This is a fantastic book you've given to us. You've written here for us, and
thank you.
It isn't. In particular for converts and their families, but I think we can have a great conversation here. You're a convert, I'm a convert. Listeners to this faith are on that in this show are on that kind of spectrum there. So I wanted to do a little twist on some of this, at least for part of our discussion, and I want to put you maybe on your toes a little bit here too.
Great.
I want to ask you to begin with. Okay, so one of the, and I'll get a little personal here too, if I may, a little vulnerable, because one of the scary things about converting to the Catholic faith. I mean, my wife and I, in our case, we're married as evangelicals. We met in our church. Our faith was central to our lives. All of our friends were from this church. It was we served in all different ministries in this church. You name it, we were part of that ministry, and then began looking into the Catholic faith, became Catholic, and then right away we kind of had kids. So we had one son when I converted. He was very young. By the time my wife converted a year later, he was 1.5 or so. So, but it's this scary thing of doing something new as a family, right? We're stepping in this new faith,
Yes.
and then raising kids in that, right? And what I always think about is the crazy thing for me and for my wife is that our kids will never know our lives before being Catholic. Our kids will be raised in a Catholic family. Always haven't been Catholic, not having the experience of, well, guys, we used to be Catholic and now or used to be Protestant, now we're Catholic. We're raising Catholic kids kind of by the seat of our pants, in a sense, right? Because we're brand new in the faith too.
Yes.
Or we were at first, at least.
Yes.
So I want to begin here. I know it's different too for converts with older kids. We can go there too. I wonder though, your advice first though, for a family of converts, those who are listening to this show, watching this show, who are thinking of converting, who have young kids, and are like, well, what happens next? What help us, Father?
Great, absolutely. Well, actually, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because many of the things that that would just be great advice for raising your kids in the faith, if you've been a lifelong Catholic, end up being kind of advice like this. Act like you just embraced your faith. Act like you're a new convert. In other words, have the zeal that someone has when they come to the faith and they discover it. You've probably read G.K. Chesterton's Orthodoxy by this point in your life. Have you read that book?
Yeah.
And he's got that great line where he's just like, I tried to, to found my new heresy, and then I found out it was orthodoxy. He kind of went around the world, and he came back to England, and he thought he had discovered the new world, and he looked at England with new eyes, is sort of the analogy or the metaphor he gives. It's the same way to look at your Catholic faith with new eyes again, as if, wow, everything is new. So the very first piece of advice I give to parents is, look, act like your Catholic faith makes you happy. If your Catholic faith doesn't make you happy, why would you expect your kids to believe it'll make them happy? That's the bottom line. Your children will stay Catholic their whole life as long as they think being Catholic will help them, will contribute to their happiness. Okay? So that's what it comes down to, joyfully practicing your faith. And there are all sorts of, particular elements that go into that. To give a simple example, with regard to marriage, the marriage of a Catholic couple, or even a newly converted couple, is the faith obviously strengthening your marriage, or is it something that causes divisions in your marriage? Right? Very often I run into this as a priest. Almost in every marriage, one spouse is a little bit more devout than the other, and sometimes there's quite a big gap between the spouses. And a mistake that the more devout spouse often makes is they try and protect their children against the less devout spouse. They think to themselves, well, I've got to make sure my children love God, and so it's more about God than my spouse, and even if I have to reject my spouse for God's sake, I got to do that. That's the way they kind of think about things, And the net effect of that is the children see, well, mom and dad are always arguing over the faith, and dad's always criticizing mom because she's not devout enough, or mom's always criticizing dad because he doesn't go to mass, or whatever, and that kind of interaction is seen by children as the Catholic faith is a wedge that separates my parents. What child is going to want that faith? No child's going to want that faith. And in fact, the Catholic faith teaches you that the believing husband sanctifies the unbelieving wife, and the believing wife sanctifies the unbelieving husband. In other words, when you're Catholic, it makes you more loving, more attentive, more affectionate, a better spouse. And therefore, your children will see that because mom or dad is Catholic and because they're more devout, they're actually a better husband or a better wife. They don't reject their spouse who's not as far along as they are. And there's a simple example of something of, like, okay, I didn't think about that. How can my newfound faith or my newfound devotion, what are some pitfalls I can avoid, and how conversely am I able to really witness to my own children about how the practice of the Catholic faith will contribute to their happiness?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. I love the idea of coming back around because, of course, you're right. Even for the lifelong Catholic, it's an act of constantly surrendering, right? And every day coming back to that faith. And I guess, in a sense, as a convert, we have maybe a bit of an advantage because we're coming with new eyes to all of that. So it's not like having to, at least at first, revisit every single day. I had Scott Hahn on this show, of course, a famous convert, and he said that, right, he's more happy to be Catholic now, 35 years later, than he was when he first became Catholic, right? And that's the joy
That's
we need
great.
we need to embrace.
And I'll
right?
point out, he's got two sons who are one I think just was ordained to the priesthood, and another one's about to be ordained to the priesthood.
Yeah.
That's an effect of the fact that he's more joyful now than when he started. So
Yeah, absolutely.
you want your kids to be really devout, and maybe some even priests are religious, then you follow that good example.
Yeah, praise God. So how about, then this is, and I have friends in this position too, who have converted with older kids. I think it probably is the same kind of metric here.
Yes.
Right? You want to show them the joy of that faith. Is there anything else in particular, you think that would benefit the older children who really are kind of on their own, right?
Absolutely. So look, one of the important things that I mentioned in my book is, your children's faith is not an extension of your faith. When they're very little, it is, but when they become their own men and women, when they're thinking on their own, and when they're grown up, you can't just try and control them. One of the worst things that Catholic parents try to do is, out of fear and anxiety for their children's salvation, they try to control their children. And you can't do that. We can barely control ourselves, much less other people. And people don't want to be controlled, and they don't want to be their faith to be just, an extension of their parents' faith. They need to make it their own. So you need to give them freedom in that regard. And sometimes that happens in the form of a child who's raised Catholic but doesn't see why they should be Catholic, and they leave the faith. And then the parent in that case has to give the child some freedom to let them search on their own and let them make the faith their own, okay? As opposed to, just constantly harping and saying, I've got a chapter in my book that says, remember, your children don't have amnesia, right? The idea is like, your child is not, it's not because they forgot what you taught them. It's because they reject what you taught them for some other reason. And you got to figure out what that real reason is, and don't keep on harping on it and whatever. But if you keep on interacting with them in such a way that you show them over and over again, you're disappointed that they're not Catholic. Well, what message does that send to the child? It sends a message to the child that, oh, because mom's a Catholic or because dad's a Catholic, they reject me because I'm not a Catholic. That their love is conditional on me being a Catholic. And you know what? The Catholic faith says nothing about that. The Catholic faith says that parents should love their children even if they are non-believers. That's what the Catholic faith actually teaches. And so if you have a grown-up child and you've converted, and say your child hasn't converted, one of the best things you can do is just say, son, daughter, my love for you is completely independent of whether or not you decide to become a Catholic. I will love you always the same. I am only going to share with you the joy I've experienced in being a Catholic. And if you find, at times in your life that that's something that you would benefit from, of course, I want you to be a Catholic. I believe the Catholic faith is true, completely true, and I can share that with you if you want, and my reasons for that. But when all's said and done, I will love you the same, regardless of whether or not you ever convert. And I want you to know that, because that's one of the things the Catholic faith teaches me, is I'm going to love my children unconditionally. So that gives the child freedom, where they feel like, I'm not going to be a disappointment to mom or dad if I don't convert. And there's no pressure there anymore. And then there's also a sense of, that's a good faith. That's a good religion that teaches parents to love their children unconditionally. I'm in with that. I can do something like that. So I think that's the proper way to respond to adult children if you've converted, but the children themselves are still kind of searching and wondering about that.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. I think of the story that the only other canon I've had on this program, which I believe I've had more than one canon, which is surprising. Father Joshua Caswell, who's the Superior General of the Canons Regular of St. John Cantius in Chicago
Yes.
there, I
Yep.
think.
Yep.
And his conversion story, we did an episode on his conversion story, and he's actually from Canada, like I am, up in, I think it was Saskatchewan. And his mom converted, his mother, who was a very an infamous politician in Canada, and she converted. She was called the Saskatoon Sledgehammer was her nickname, and she converted and told all the kids, convert or get out of the house. You're on your own. Was kind
Wow.
of the line she drew. So
Yeah.
he ended up okay. He'd say, and she's a fantastic woman, of course. But
Right.
quite the story. So maybe
Right,
not
exactly.
the best.
Yeah, I don't
the best
recommend sledgehammering your children in in politics or in faith, but
Yeah.
sometimes it is interesting, because God sees that parents have really good intentions there. So even when the parents mess up on something
Yeah.
like that, God often figures out another way to give the children grace.
I guess the irony is that he's now a priest, and so is his brother. So
yeah, there you go.
It all worked out. You talk about in this book the marks of a faithful family, and I love
Yes.
that. I love that so much because, gosh, it's something that we search for as young families. I mean, I think as families at any stage are searching for this, especially though now myself, my peers, people of this age who are establishing families, kids are growing up, and gosh, you watch them grow and think, oh, am I doing this right? As they get older and older and older, you think, are we doing the right thing? Are we setting them up to continue their faith as they grow? So you give us some really great pointers, some really great things to think about that help us to I guess measure, are we doing the things that a faithful family does? I'm not putting that very well, but
Sure.
Can you give us a bit of a sense of what are those kind of marks of a
Yes.
faithful family in your mind?
Yeah, I like I said, there's 5 different marks that I find really belong to pretty much every flourishing Christian family, Catholic family. One, you've got integrity, which means that the whole family is present and active. Now there are situations, and this is something I put at the very beginning of that section. I mentioned a flourishing Christian family is not one which is unaffected by tragedy. There might be tragedy in a flourishing Christian family, and that actually allows the faith component to shine out more brightly, right? So it's not that the flourishing Christian family is unaffected by poverty, for example, or death or sickness, right? Or mental illness, or a child with Down syndrome or special needs or handicaps or whatever, right? The Holy Family, I mean, they were chased out of Bethlehem. They had to go to Egypt. They lived in poverty. I mean, there was a lot of problems that the Holy Family faced, So the flourishing Christian family, it's really about the moral dimension of their life, not the physical sort of outward dimension. So when I say integrity, I don't mean that no one's died. I mean, sometimes in a beautiful Christian family, someone dies young. St. Joseph seems to have died young in the Holy Family, for example. But there's integrity in the sense that all the members who are living are present and active, right? And it's not torn by divorce or strife. Parents and children spend a lot of time together each day. I recommend always that a family should have kind of a regular family meal that nearly everyone is supposed to be present at each day, preferably dinner, but sometimes lunch or whatever, depending on where you are or what you're doing. And so that integrity is mark number 1. So then mark number 2, I would say, is order and harmony. That's where everyone's in the right relationship. The spouses in right relationship with each other, the parents loving and being generous to the children obeying and honoring their parents. Right? There's order and harmony there. There's not this idea of just each person is on their own and not responding or returning what they ought to, right, to the other. Then there's a third mark, which I call communion. And communion means sharing a life together. When you're sharing a life, it means that you really know someone and you love them based on that knowledge. I love to tell a story. There was a young man who used to come to me for spiritual direction, and he had gone off to college, so I hadn't seen him in a while, but I did a wedding, and he and his girlfriend were guests at that wedding. So at the reception, I decided, hey, let's take a walk and let's visit, and you'd give me a little update on your life. He'd been dating this girl for about a year, so I thought it might be serious. So I asked him, I said, well, how's it going with that girl? And he said, terrible, Father. And I was surprised, because they looked like they were having a good time. And I said, what's wrong? He said, she's in love with another man. And I was really surprised because they were laughing and smiling and, together as a couple. I said, I don't understand. You were so happy together. And he says, let me explain. The whole year I've been dating her, I've been hiding my faults from her. She doesn't even know that I smoke. I'm afraid that if she knew my faults, she wouldn't want to date me anymore. And it was really interesting. It's like there's a lack of communion. They could be together for a year, spend all this physical time together, but unless there's that accurate knowledge where you reveal your problems and someone knows the real you, there's not communion. And to have the real you with your problems known by someone, and then that person saying to you, I choose to love you with your problems and faults, that's communion, huh? So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about that has to happen in a flourishing Christian family. Then there's a fourth mark, and that fourth mark is generosity in bringing about new life. There's a saying in philosophy, I think Aristotle may have been the first one to coin it. He says, the good is diffusive of itself, right? Happy Catholic families, happy Christian families, they want to share their joy. And one of the clearest ways that happens is generosity and bringing forth, begetting new life, sharing the joy of their marriage and incarnating it in each new child, that love of the spouses. And that generosity in bringing forth new life is a sign not only of the health of the relationship between the husband and wife, but also of the joy and the love that they want to communicate to others. First of all, inside their own home with their children, and then to those outside their families. And, I like to point this out. There's a euphemism for contraception, the word contraception. The euphemism is protection. And I like to point this out. Who's your enemy?
Yeah.
You protect yourself from an enemy. So what is this protection thing? Is your enemy your spouse? Is your enemy your future children? Do you see the members of your family as your enemy? And the couple that is contracepting like that and not being generous and bringing forth new life, and they're afraid, it shows there's something else wrong at a deeper level there, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This fear, and to treat the people you're supposed to be most intimate with, to treat them as your enemy, that you need protection against them, And sometimes in the very moment you're supposed to be expressing the greatest love. It's no wonder that divorce is so common among couples who contracept and so uncommon among those who don't. So that giving forth or bringing forth new life is something which is really key. I often will say to a couple, hey, tell me this, what would you give in exchange for your youngest child? $1 million, $10 million? Come on, name your price. And no sane parent would say anything. They'd be like, no, I'd never give anything in exchange for my youngest child. So I tell them, well, so for a fact if you had another child, it'd make you happier than anything else you could have in its place. So what are you afraid of? I know it's hard. I mean, don't get me wrong, but but it's always worth it.
Yeah.
No matter how hard it is, it's always worth it, So anyway, I just point that out as that there has to be that joy that is communicable to others in order for a marriage to be flourishing. And then the last mark I give, which I think is the most proper mark of a flourishing Catholic Christian family, is striving beyond the natural to the supernatural. Because you can have all those natural goods there, but unless you strive beyond them to the supernatural, you're not really Christian. I remember one young man who used to come to me for spiritual direction, good young man, came from a very good family, but there was really a strong emphasis on the natural virtues and not so much on the supernatural, And at one point I just said to him, remember, you have to die a Catholic, not a virtuous pagan. It's It's like it's about the sacraments. It's about prayer. It's about all these things. It's not about just like practicing all, justice, prudence, fortitude, courage, temperance. It's more than that, And sometimes what you have is these beautiful families where the natural goods are all there, but when it comes down to like going to morning mass, daily mass, for example, it's always more about spending time around the breakfast table instead of making the sacrifice of going to daily mass. Or instead of an evening rosary, you want to watch a movie, and rarely does family prayer come in, and so forth, right? So you need to go beyond the natural to the supernatural. But conversely, it's not enough to just focus on the supernatural without having those natural foundations there. I've known many Catholic families that are very traditional outwardly, right? Where the parents are, they go to a very traditional Latin mass, and the children are, always pray like this, and they're bolt upright, and the girls have little mantillas on their head, and everything looks so perfect from the outside. And then it turns out dad's an alcoholic. There's no affection between mom and dad. The children are filled with fear. The whole reason why everything is the way it is because they're afraid they're going to go to hell if they do like the slightest thing wrong. And those families, that's not how God intended an experience of the faith. Grace builds upon nature and perfects it. If the natural goods aren't there, if they're rejected or ignored, then the supernatural edifice can't stand. God made both the order of grace and nature, and he meant them to work in harmony. And any corruption or rejection of the natural order ends up being a rejection of the supernatural order. It's right out of the Summa Theologiae. St. Thomas talks about that. So that being so, you need that fifth mark. You need both the natural goods, but then you need to strive beyond the natural to the supernatural. And if you do that, then you'll really find that your family is flourishing and is the way it ought to be.
Yeah, that's fantastic stuff. And it's funny on that last point, I think of my own upbringing. So I was brought up, and I never thought of this idea of, what did you say, a devout pagan, or the expression you used there? That's fantastic.
Yeah,
I have to remind me again before the end, so I can borrow that, because I always said that
I said a virtuous pagan. You got to die a Catholic, not a virtuous pagan.
See, I always said that I was raised in a Christian home without Christ. It's how I joke about it, because I was raised in this. Really, we went to church a few times in my life. My parents were really kind of non-religious, non-Christian. But we were raised very, very, I think, very virtuously, right? Mm-hmm. We had those natural virtues. I considered a grace in advance of my conversion to Christianity that I was deep in the punk rock scene in high school, but never drank, never smoked, never got into those kind of promiscuous things. I was kind of saved from all that kind of wild lifestyle while being kind of in that scene, because I was raised to respect other people and to have limits and temperance and these kinds of virtues without Christ. So when I encountered somebody who was a Christian for the first time, really, and heard who Jesus was, I was like, yeah, I'm good to go. I've got all these other things. Like, I've got the base, the foundation here laid. I want to become a Christian now, right? It was very natural for me to convert in that point. But I see your point, right? That's not enough to make you a Catholic, is doing all those things. You do have to take that next step and actually live that Catholic faith. I love that. And conversely, I love the other side of that you mentioned here, that you do have to have those natural things too. We know those Catholic families, I think, and I think when I first became a convert, and I think this is the case for many converts, I've got all kinds of emails that are along these lines, is we're attracted sometimes to that Catholic who looks very pious and intelligent and knows their faith and defends it well, and is very ardent in their Catholic faith, right? That's appealing as in Catholic, because this person's got it figured out. Like, they know how to be Catholic, and they're so serious about being Catholic. But then you find sometimes, I think, as you say, that they're sometimes missing that foundation of those natural kind of virtues, right? So that person may be very learned in the faith and go to traditional Latin Mass every day of the week and, right, do 1 million rosaries per day or something, but not be very generous in spirit. Be mean-spirited or rude to people, or not have time for charity, these kinds of things, right? I mean, that's the opposite thing to I think be wary of. And I think for the convert, that sometimes is an attractor, but putting that in perspective, we have to make sure that people that we're attracted to in that case, that we're trying to model our families after, right, are as you say, have these marks that you indicate here, I think.
It's a little bit like a kind of a Catholic version of Lutheranism, you know, the dunghill cover with snow, you know what I mean? It's like, I've got all the outward trappings of, you know, really traditional Catholic, and I look really Catholic on the outside, you know. You need to have the interior dispositions that the Catholic faith really demands of us, right? As Jesus says, right? Even in your heart. Now, I don't get me wrong too. I want to point out, there are people who are very wounded, and so they're doing all these other things, you know, and they're trying. I mean, I'm not saying it's better for you to just absolutely abandon the outward, you know, practice of the Catholic faith if you don't have those natural foundations. I'd say, no, build up those natural foundations while you continue to practice the Catholic faith. But there's a famous story, I think it was about Evan Waugh, who was criticized by someone for just being mean. And he said, "Madam, if you had known me before I was a Catholic, you would you would realize this is a great improvement," you know, sort of thing. Like, imagine what I would be if I weren't a Catholic, you know. So I don't want to make it sound like the practice of the Catholic faith as such isn't a good thing. I'm just saying you're not flourishing if the roots of that tree are not planted in good soil, you know.
Yeah, that's so important distinction to make. I want to talk about, you talk about Catholic schools in this book.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, this is a big sticking point for me. We're kind of unique up here in Ontario, Canada, where I'm
yes, I know about that.
Yeah, we have this very strange state-funded Catholic school system, right? It's left over from our Constitution. We're trying to appease the French and English.
It came over from Europe. The same thing happens in Europe.
Yeah, it did. So it's a very strange situation where we have this Catholic school system that is a church attached to each school. The diocese runs the school, but it's funded by the government. And so, I mean, growing up, all the Catholic kids that I met as a guy in the public school system were these Catholics who went to Catholic school. And these are the guys, I mentioned I was in the punk rock scene. So these are the guys who knew where to get the best drugs. Honestly, were the guys at the Catholic school. And you knew it, right? You see these guys come to these shows in their Catholic uniforms from Catholic high school. You knew they were the Catholics. And they were the hardest partiers. They were the meanest guys, right? The guys who were swearing and breaking bottles and all kinds of stuff. And here I was, especially once I became Christian and kind of, you know, was part of the little Christian subset of the punk rock scene where I was. It was like, wait a minute, these guys aren't okay, they're Catholic, they're not even Christian the way they act. They were so far, they were less Christian than the non-Christians who were at these shows, just based on how they lived so hard and how they were so rude and so. I mean, when I read what Catholic schools in a book like yours, I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm ready to go. Like, I'm fired up, because this for me is a point of passion. And I feel like, if I can say one more thing before I let you go, because I'm rambling here, but I think the concern is, or the fear is, we're letting these Catholic schools raise our Catholic kids in some case. And that seems to me, I mean, I've seen firsthand how dangerous that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, let me say a few things. First of all, it's interesting you mentioned that last line you put in there. You said, we're letting the Catholic schools raise our Catholic kids. The Catholic schools are not a substitute for parental education. The primary educators of your children are you, parents. The parents are the primary educators of their children always and everywhere. And that's Catholic doctrine. Catholic schools are only there to assist parents in raising their children, not to replace them. I remember reading a very interesting article by Frederick Engels. Frederick Engels was Karl Marx's sidekick in founding communism, and he did a lot of writings on the economic side of communism. And at one point he said something interesting. He said, he's speaking about just in the communist society, he was talking about how the education in the communist society would take over the responsibility of the parents, right? Basically universal education. He says, and then the parents would have no reason to stay together, so we could abolish marriage altogether.
Wow.
That was the view of Frederick Engels. He saw the connection between marriage and the education of offspring. And so he said, if we can just get other people educating the children instead of the parents, then we can break up the marriages. In the perfect communist world, no one would be married. They'd all just be sleeping with each other, and the state would take care of the children. It's horrible. It's just a dystopian, horrible view. But In fact, we're starting to see something like that.
Yeah.
We're seeing, parents hand over their children to be educated by others from the time they're infants all the way until they're through college, and the parents' only common activity at this point is going on vacations, or filing tax returns jointly or something. That's apparently the only thing they have in common anymore. And so that's very damaging to your marriage and your relationship to the extent that you're not involved in your children's education. I always recommend, to the extent it's possible, that parents start by homeschooling their children as long as they can and keep their children at home, as long as they can. Now, that's not always practicable, given people's different, economic situations and educational backgrounds and everything. But as far as you can, do that. And then once you do have to seek help, enlist help in educating your children, always remember that help is at your service, not vice versa. And you demand accountability, and you're very careful with the schools that you choose. So just because a school has the label Catholic, doesn't mean it's a Catholic school. And up in Ontario, I'm pretty sure because of that government funding, there's all sorts of things that are put into Catholic, the curriculums of schools that are named Catholic that have nothing to do with the Catholic faith and are contrary to the Catholic faith. And as much as you can, avoid those. There are, here in the United States, I know that there are Catholic schools that are founded and run by lay people, not by the diocese. I don't know if something like that is possible up in Canada. There are other private charter schools and things like that. And sometimes, we have the same problem down here too. I remember I told my brother he wanted to send his daughter to a local Catholic school and asked me about it. And I said, no, don't send her there. No one can demolish the Catholic faith better than an ex-Catholic who's pretending to be a Catholic. And I told him, don't send him there. Don't send your daughter there. I'd rather you send her to the public school than that school. And so that's what he did. And she stayed Catholic, So it really is, you have to be careful and don't be naive. And I have a whole bunch of advice, like a list of questions you should ask about, like what, are the people in the administration practicing Catholics? Do they demand adherence to Catholic teaching, not only in what they say, but also in what they do? Do they expect the morals of their teachers and administrators to be in keeping with the Catholic Church's moral teaching? Are the majority of students practicing Catholics? Are there things offered, at the school, like Mass and confessions and sacraments like that, right? What clubs are allowed on campus? What's a curriculum? What classes are they taught? Do they have a sex ed class there? That's not Catholic. No one should be teaching your children about sex other than you. Yeah. You're the one who's supposed to be doing that, and so forth. So you need to ask those questions and ask those hard questions. And that means a grave inconvenience, because you won't be able to just fall into what everyone else is sort of doing and what's easy for everyone. And that's one of the hard things. But, Christians from the beginning had to be different. From the very beginning, in the time of Christ and the apostles, there's a certain separation that the Christian had to take from the society, and they couldn't just live like the pagans. And that put a bullseye on the back of a lot of Christians. But hey, you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, and Jesus did say, the world's going to hate you because of me. And it's what you signed up for. The natural habitat of the Christian is persecution and the hardships that come with not being a member of this world, just being in the world but not of the world. So that's one of the areas where Catholic parents have to carry a heavier cross, because they don't have as much help in the education of their children often as others. But some places you can find, if one of the things I recommend is, if you can, live somewhere near, good Catholic enclaves where there's groups of people that can can help each other. So.
Yeah, well, that was my next question I was going to ask you. In this, this course is all interconnected. And before we just move on to that, though, I want to say how it's kind of terrifying, right? Especially for the convert, the Catholic convert who has young kids and finds a Catholic school and goes, okay, it's a Catholic school. This must be great. Put my kids in here. Like, you're asking really good questions, or assessing good questions that they should ask, because how horrifying would it be to be a new Catholic looking to try and raise your kids the best way and put them in this Catholic school, only to find out that the teachers aren't practicing Catholics, or what they're learning is not those are horrible things to discover. So I think upfront asking those kinds of questions is so important. Because so I want to talk about this Catholic enclave idea. I think it's so important. I can't remember who it was. Recently, I was on Twitter, and one of these more, say, left-leaning Catholics kind of wrote this little tweet and said, "Look, I know I'm a bit of a leftist Catholic. I know that I sometimes rag on these traditional right-wing Catholics, but you know what? They're right. They're right in that the world is trying to take our kids from us and is trying to raise our kids for us, and doesn't like our kids like the church does, right? It seems sometimes that we're alarmist in thinking that that the world is out to, I don't know, corrupt our kids or brainwash them or make them not Catholic. But even somebody who's saying, look, there are crazy Catholics. I'm crazy. We're all in different spectrums, but we're all right here in this case, right? There's truth in that. I mean, even if we can't agree on certain things in the liturgy,
one of the things you got to do if you're a Catholic is actually believe that what Jesus said was true. And Jesus said that the world would hate us, that the world would try and attack us. The world is under the dominion of Satan. We know that. We know this is not our home. It's the next life that's our home. And so therefore, of course, Satan hates our children, and Satan wants to take the faith away from our children and from us too. And therefore, to the extent that he has the ability to control things in the world, he's going to do that, right? Satan tried to tempt Jesus to become a king, to become a secular ruler. And you know what he said when he did that temptation? All the glory and the power of these kingdoms are handed over to me, and I give them to who I will. That tells you who's in charge at the level of, just the political, earthly power realm, huh? Jesus was not judged by a just judge. Pontius Pilate was under the dominion of Satan, insofar as, he did not believe in the truth. He did not even know what truth was. So there you have it. This is not surprising, and it's been true since the time of Jesus and the first Christians and the first Catholics, and it will be true till the end of the world. So no, it's not alarmist. No, it's a war. We're the church militant, and therefore we have to actually act like that. And being naive and sort of saying like everyone has good intentions and everyone's my friend, and you can just sort of entrust your children to anyone. You wouldn't entrust your children's health care to just anyone. You wouldn't trust your children. You wouldn't just sort of drop your children off for a day at a stranger's house. Why on earth would you drop your children off at an educational institution to let their morals and what they think to be true or false to be formed by people you don't know well, right? And you don't agree with. So absolutely, it's that's not naive, and it's okay to be. It's not alarmist. It's just realist.
So I want to talk about the idea of this Catholic enclaving communities. This is so important, especially and it was for us as new converts, right? What we did, I joined the church first. My wife followed a year afterwards. I wasn't the best husband and just kind of rushing forward. I maybe should have been a bit more open in my spiritual journey. But water under the bridge, I guess, as they say. But what I did is I really just phoned up the closest Catholic parish and said, I want to join the church, sign me up, kind of thing, right? I didn't do any research. I assumed they were all the same, kind of naively. And I entered into the church, in this church that was beautiful, a really gorgeous church built by a very famous architect, Scottish architect in our area here from the 1800s, but really not with a lot of life in there. I mean, the priest was a lovely man, but he'd been there for, say, 30 years. It hadn't been moved. And no programs have been developed in 30 years. So there was nothing for children, nothing for families. I remember the last day of RCAA, which for listeners is the class you do for Catholic converts, for adult Catholic converts. The last day of that class was labeled on the schedule as getting involved. And I thought, oh, great, here's the chance to get involved. And my wife and I mentioned before, right? We were in everything. We ran all the different small groups. We did all kinds of different outreach ministries and all these different things, date nights, and ran all these couples engagement things. And here I was thinking like, okay, I can get engaged in this Catholic parish here. And the sister who ran the program brought out this kind of stack of really old kind of Xeroxed, I mean, probably before Xerox, it was like I don't know what you call that, carbon copy machine.
What do they call those things? The mimeograph machines or something like that.
That's it.
With the purple ink or something.
Yeah, it was. And that's what it was, these kind of pamphlets of what you can get involved with. And it was things like the choir or the knitting circle, or I think they called it adult childminders, and it was people who would essentially rock a baby during mass for like, but right, it wasn't really like. So I saw this and thought, wow, don't think this is the parish for me, or the parish for our family to really put roots down in, right? And so we kind of began a search to look for a parish that, right, that could surround us in a Catholic community, right? Because we figured we came from an evangelical church that had all those things, intentionally built community, like part of our very, I mean, we had a very loose kind of faith statement as a non-denominational Christian church, but one of those things was we're journeying together. So we emphasize the togetherness, which of course is a Christian principle, a Catholic principle, and my wife, for her part, really didn't consider the Catholic faith a live option, even when I converted, until we could really find a place that felt like home. Like, right, her kind of thing was, I don't want to become Catholic as a family if we have no place to raise our kids, if there's nothing for the kids to do and be a part of, right? And no community for them. So it really hit home for us. And I do get letters from so many Catholic converts looking into this and going, well, where can I go? Like, I can become Catholic. We can become Catholic, but then we're the only Catholic family in this church that's really practicing. There's no other young Catholic families. How do we build community? Because we see this as being so important, right? Of raising our Catholic kids, our Catholic families together. So what advice do you have for people like us who are new Catholics looking for a place to start putting down roots? What do we do?
Well, some advice is kind of like way in advance. So even I remember when I was when I graduated from Thomas Aquinas College. So the first time really I was inserted into a vibrant practicing Catholic community was there at Thomas Aquinas College. It was amazing. I mean, truly amazing. And from that experience, I realized for the first time, like, how essential that is to the practice of the Catholic faith. I mean, I live now, even when I decided to become a priest, it was obvious to me I wasn't going to become a diocesan priest because there's virtually no community for diocesan priests. There isn't a seminary, and then they're done with it. And so I thought, I got to be a member of a religious order where I'm around other fervent, practicing, believing, charitable Catholic priests. So even as a priest, you see the importance of that, right? When people are doing things together, it's just like any other job where you're working together. It's so much easier when you're doing it together. So I was convinced of that. And I remember thinking after I graduated from Thomas Aquinas and I was going back to work, I worked at that point at a patent law firm in Newport Beach, an intellectual property law firm in Newport Beach. And I had a number of options of living within, half an hour drive or so of where I worked. And the first thing I did is I looked to find where was the best Catholic parish nearby that had sacraments readily available and, fervent Catholic, very strong believing Catholic community. And I moved 2 blocks from there. That's what I did. And I never regretted it. It's like I could it had 2 morning daily masses. They had confession before each mass each morning. It was great. It was wonderful. The people who were there were very seriously Catholic. I immediately was able to get inserted into kind of young adult group of friends. It was great. And so that's the first piece of advice I give is move near a really good, vibrant Catholic church. Okay. Then another piece of advice I can give is there's not only the church itself that you live in, but there's also very often kind of homeschooling networks in certain areas. Now, they tend to sort of circle around these good parishes and things like that. But, for example, that Thomas Aquinas College network I told you about, there you'll find pockets of these people, sometimes 20 or 30 or 40 families, and they can even, sometimes they help each other with homeschooling. There's such a big network up in Pasadena, where I grew up, that they were able to found their own Catholic school, lay-run Catholic school. What happened is you had dozens of Catholic moms homeschooling, and they said, why don't we all just do this together, and I'll do 8th grade, you do 7th grade, you do 6th. They actually founded a whole school, St. Monica's, with 12 grades eventually, and now it's got like 300 students, and it's a super, super Catholic school, and it was all founded by a bunch of homeschooling moms that said, let's do this together, So, find people who are serious practicing Catholics and get online, and you can find out where these people are. and it's better if you can physically be near them so that you have, a couple days a week where you go to the park together and you play with your children, with their children and stuff like that. Now, if worse comes to worse, in the worst case scenario, you can always at least do something online together with people, and there's wonderful, kind of resources like Mother Divine Grace, for example. I'm on the board of Mother Divine Grace, which is a wonderful homeschooling resource thing. And that involves not just giving a curriculum and kind of suggesting books. It actually has all these people that help, and they put you into contact with other people who are doing Mother Divine Grace in the area and stuff like that. So at the very least, you should be able to at least have sort of online resources where you can be together with Catholic families and share your experiences, because the one thing that's not going to happen or not going to turn out well is a Catholic faith lived alone, your family.
Yeah. Here maybe a tough question for you, and this is maybe a bit, I don't want to throw you off your game, but maybe you're up for the tough ones. Do you leave a parish? 'Cause I can think of so many people that I've heard from, especially these new converts who, like I did, convert in a parish and get going and realize, gee whiz, I'm the only one, or we're the only family running things here. And go to the pastor and say, hey, can we get a youth group going? Can we get a children's ministry going? Can we get like a couples engagement thing going here to get families connected? And the answer is, sure, you start it or you run it. I mean, I get these messages, and sometimes people are like, yeah, okay, I do want to do this. This is what I'm called to. Let's get this going, and it goes and it goes well. But other times the feeling is, okay, they're always the one having to start that thing. And that's a burden, I think, especially for young families who have a lot of time on their hands to begin with. Do you, in your opinion, with your advice, do you leave a parish and find one that has those things where you can grow? Or do you stay and grow those things yourself and hope that you get the graces and the help to do that?
That's really a question of prudence. I will say this: the canon law permits people to go to mass at places other than their parish of geographical boundaries, and to have your confession heard by any priest who has faculties. So the canon law gives you that freedom, and I think that the church has enough, horse sense to realize your local parish might not be a faithful, good Catholic parish. So I guess a few things I would look for first is you start from who's the priest there, who's the pastor, and see whether or not there's someone who really wants to reform and bring about improvement in the parish. But if you look and you see that they're not interested in that, and anything that you would do would just be sort of, busy work or something like that, and there's no real chance of actually improving or reforming the parish, then I would say, probably for the sake of your family, it's better to find another good parish, even if it's farther away. The next thing, if you've got a good priest, is you say to yourself, okay, is the parish itself something where you can really work with, or the people you can work with and build things up with? And are you capable of doing, like you said, are you capable of contributing in a way that's going to help? Or do you think that's just like way above your abilities and your capacities? And if it is, then you might, again, for the sake of the good of your family, you might say, okay, this is for someone else. This is a parish that someone else needs to reform, and I can't do it. I just don't have the ability or the bandwidth given my circumstances in life. And therefore, I need to go somewhere else where there's a better environment, which is healthier for my family. But if both those things are in place, namely you've got a good priest and there's a potential for reforming the parish, you should stay and try and build it up. But you really have to, it's a matter of prudence about when you do that. Might take a few years, but I think it's really possible.
Yeah. I want to squeak in one more question here with you if I can, because we admit we didn't cover the idea of your kids leaving the faith. The last part of your book here, tie this in this little bow here for us, deals with kids leaving the faith. So, I mean, there's lots of good advice in this book. We can't go over all this now. So what would be one thing you'd say to people who are listening, who are watching, whose children were raised Catholic and have left the faith altogether? I mean, that's a tough thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, in the scriptures, it's recorded that Jesus raised 3 different people from the dead. The first was the daughter of the widow of Jairus. The other was the son of the widow of Naim. and the other was the brother of Martha and Mary, Lazarus. And so what you see there is all the relationships in the immediate family, right? You've got father, daughter, brother, sister, father, daughter, mother, son, brother, sister, all the relationships within an immediate family. And I think that there's a reason for that Jesus reserves his greatest miracle, raising someone from the dead, for the prayers of an immediate family member. Because just as God has made the family the natural means, an instrument of bringing natural life into the world, he also wants to make the family the means of communicating supernatural life and raising children spiritually from the dead. So the first thing you have to know is, just as those people had confidence that Jesus would raise their family member from the dead in the scriptures, so you also have to have confidence that Jesus will raise your child from spiritual death, and realize your prayers have great power to do that, and believe that Jesus loves your children more than you do, right? What he wants from you is he wants your cooperation and your faith and your trust, okay? So that's point number one. You need to have faith and trust. And sometimes we add to our cross, like Jairus, he had to have Jesus with him, feel his presence along the entire way to see his daughter. In the meantime, his daughter dies. And so Jairus has to suffer more. He could have had the faith of the centurion, who he just said, just say the word, Lord, and my daughter will be healed. And he would have gone home in faith without feeling Jesus's physical presence. But then he would have experienced when he got home, that the fact that his daughter was well. And it's got to be the same way with Catholic parents. Just believe that Jesus is going to take care of your child. And when you get home to heaven, you're going to find your child there, because the Lord Jesus he's not going to let the child of those tears perish. Just believe and trust that the Lord is going to take care of your children, okay? So that's a disposition of heart you need to have. Yeah. With regard to practically what do you do, I already gave some advice earlier about the fact, don't henpeck them, don't browbeat them, don't make them feel like your love for them is conditioned on whether or not they're a practicing Catholic. Rather, be as loving as you were to them, and in the same way as if they had been fully practicing Catholics. And don't bring it up every single time you meet them. Just let them know, I love you because you're my son, you're my daughter. That's enough. That's all I need to love you. And as for the rest, I'm just going to very patiently wait. And your child almost certainly will have their prodigal son moment, because I have a chapter, it's called Use Your Unfair Advantage. Because the one thing is that Jesus Christ founded the Catholic Church with the means of salvation. And the only way anyone's ever going to be fully happy in this life is if they're a practicing, joyful member of the Catholic Church. That's the only way. Jesus made us for himself, and he made us to be happy in his church. So for a fact, if your child abandons the practice of the Catholic faith, they're going to have that prodigal son experience of not feeling fulfilled and not happy. And you wait for that time patiently. And when your child comes to you and says, I feel miserable, I'm unhappy, I'm unfulfilled, I don't know why, or I've got these trials in my life, I don't know how to handle them, that's the moment when the door is open and you share. When they want you to share, you share how your faith and the practice of your faith has helped you to find joy and peace in the midst of those trials. Yeah. And that's the best thing you can do as a parent. Just patiently wait and trust. But, share when the moment is right.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And I love the point you make that God loves our children more than we do, which is hard to fathom as a father, right?
Yes.
That's the case, but it is, right? I mean, and that fact alone is worth the price. This book, it's a great advice. I love it.
Thank you.
Can you tell us more about where we can find this book? Find
sure.
out more things about you. I'll put links in the show notes as well.
Oh, yeah,
to all
absolutely.
These things.
Sure. Yeah, so the name of the book is called Always a Catholic. It's from the phrase, once a Catholic, always a Catholic. And it's published by Catholic Answers. So one place to go is just straight to Catholic Answers. It's Catholic.com. And then you push the little shop button on the top there. Or sometimes you can just go Catholic.shop or shop.catholic.com or something like that. I don't remember. You can look it up on the internet there. And then it's obviously also on sort of the major, booksellers like Amazon, I think Barnes and Noble and things like that. And you can just type in my name or Always a Catholic or something like that, and it should show up there. So there are all sorts of ways to get a hold of the book. And as long as you got the internet, it should be easy enough. And if you don't have the internet, then call Catholic Answers and they'll be happy to send you one.
That sounds fantastic. Father, great to meet you. Thank you for being here. I want to say God bless you and your ministry in the
Thank you.
church. And thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Keith. God bless you, and God bless everyone who's listening today. I pray for you and for all your families.